My name is Emmanuela Bakola, and I'm an assistant professor here at the Department of Classics and Ancient History at the University of Warwick. My research is about Greek theatre and the way it engages with the environment. Now, the performance spaces of ancient Greece were in many respects radically different from anything we encounter in the modern era, as opposed to the inside, dark, closed spaces which relied on artificial lighting. Theatre in Greece took place in the open, in the bright light of day, with the sun illuminating the productions. Theatres were not so much buildings as landscape architecture, and they were embedded in the natural environment and offered the audiences panoramic views of the surrounding landscapes, the surrounding environment as well, both natural and man-made. Now, as I said in my research, I'm very interested in how the surrounding environment, both natural and man-made, was embedded in the plays and in their dramatic meaning in particular, and how it helped them engage with big ideas such as ideas about justice, about the cosmic order, the role of the divine, and the role of the humans in the world. Of course, performing poetry in the open is nothing new. For centuries, Greek poetry was performed in the open, under the sun or under the stars, and actually scholars believe that this is how the Iliad and the Odyssey, these magnificent and enormous in scale epics, came about by performances over several days during festivals, religious festivals that happened in the landscape, in the open. Now, my own interest, as I said, is in the drama of the 5th century BC, and although many playwrights such as Sophocles, Euripides, Aristophanes, all the surviving playwrights, in fact, do engage with the environment, both natural and man-made, in their plays. I am particularly interested in Aeschylus because I think Aeschylus has got a special relationship with the idea of the environment, and I will give you one example, the example of one play of Aeschylus to show you this type of engagement and how much integrating the environment into the dramaturgy of the plays actually augments the dramatic meaning of the plays. So the Persians was produced in 472 BC in the theatre of Dionysus in Athens, and this was just 8 years after the second invasion of the Persians in Greece. Now, the play is all about the aftermath of the defeat of the Persians in a major sea battle, the Battle of Salamis, by the Greeks. And although we know that in history this sea battle didn't necessarily mean the end of the empire, in the play it is presented actually as meaning, the end, the elimination of the Persian Empire. So there is a lot of reflection in the play about destruction of wealth, bringing down a powerful and seemingly invincible empire, and there is a lot of imagery about devaluation and destruction of wealth, or ruins and rags. Now, the idea of ruins is quite prominent towards the end of the play, and what it interests me is at the moment during the production, when the Athenians were watching this play in the theatre of Dionysus, they would be seeing themselves ruins. Only those ruins wouldn't have been the ruins, of course, of the Persians. They were the remnants from the pillaging, the destruction, and the raging which the Persians had caused only 7-8 years later, and which would have only by now been partially rectified. And this actually gives an enormous weight to the reflection of the play that now, only 8 years later, after their victory in the Persian Wars, the Athenians are well on their way to becoming an empire, and a very greedy one, and a very focused on wealth, on acquiring wealth one. Now, if we situate this play in a different context, as we know that the plays were not just performed once in the theatre of Dionysus, but they were also hosted in the festivals that took place in the demes of Athens, the suburbs. We also know that plays travelled far in the Greek West, and the Persians in particular had been produced in the theatre of Syracuse, and it was well known in Athens, well down in the 5th century, which can only mean one thing, that it had been performed many times. Now, if you situate this play in one of those deme theatres, the Thorikos, again, its dramatic meaning becomes augmented, but in a quite a different way. Thorikos is the theatre which is adjacent, like literally sitting next to the mines where the Athenians were extracting their silver from their earth. Now, for a play that it is so focused on acquiring wealth, using wealth to increase the power and the expansion of an empire, and thinking that Athens at that time is well on its way to becoming an empire, surely adduces extra weight to the play. But my favorite actually is not the theatre of Thorikos and its environment and how it increases the meaning of the Persians, but in fact the theatre of Eleusis. Now, for the theatre of Eleusis, we know that in the 5th century it had a vibrant dramatic festival. Eleusis was the hometown of the tragic poet Aeschylus, the poet of the play. Now, this theatre and the vista that it would have provided the audience with would give this play a context out of this world, because what the audience would see when they were watching the play would be, in fact, the very straits of Salamis, the very space where that catastrophic naval battle happened for the Persians. And not only that, the theatre of Eleusis, if it is indeed where we think it was, just south of the Eleusis Acropolis, it was also adjacent to the famous sanctuary of Demeter and Persephone, again a sanctuary that celebrates the wealth that comes from the earth, and the life and the cycles of life, the cycles of nature. By taking this one example, the example of Aeschylus' Persians, and situating it in three different contexts of theatres and their environments, we can see how each environment adduces extra weight to the core ideas and reflections of the play, but in very, very different ways. One thing we should always keep in mind is that Greek theatre, like so much of the poetry of ancient Greece, is preoccupied with humanity's place in the world, humanity's place in the cosmic order. Now, as a genre that thinks and expresses itself by positioning bodies in spaces, we may realize now how positioning all these ideas in the surrounding environment and integrating that environment in the place would have benefited their central preoccupations about the role of humanity in the world, the role of humanity in the natural order.